My son tried to open a $600,000 business loan. I bought the company he wanted instead. Even now, as I say those words, my chest tightens with the memory. That $600,000 wasn't just money, it was decades of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and every ounce of energy I poured into building a life for him. It was my blood turned into paper bills, my years of labor condensed into a figure he thought he could gamble with. And the worst part, he didn't even ask, he assumed. He treated my name, my savings, my very security as something he could play with, like chips on a casino table. When I first stumbled across the truth, my hand actually trembled. I had been shuffling through documents one evening, and a folder with loan application drafts caught my eye. At first, I thought it was some kind of joker business plan scribbled by a dreamer with no sense of reality. But as I flipped through the pages, saw the figures, the projected loan, and God help me, the line where my name had been penciled in as guarantor, the coffee cup in my other hand slipped and shattered across the floor. The sound jolted me, but not as much as the realization my son had already prepared to risk my life's work. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the broken pieces on the tile, as if they represented everything else in my life that he was about to smash. The silence of the house pressed in around me, so heavy it felt like my lungs could barely fill. That was when the betrayal set in, not just the betrayal of money, but of trust, of love, of every single sacrifice I had made for him since the day he was born. You see, I was never a wealthy person by birth. I clawed my way up. I skipped meals so he could eat better. I turned down vacations so he could go to better schools. I stayed up late fixing roofs, patching walls, and working extra shifts just so he would never feel the sting of poverty the way I did growing up. And yet, here he was, casually preparing to use me as collateral for a dream that was nothing more than arrogance wrapped in numbers. My heart pounded with a strange mixture of rage and despair. Rage that my own flesh and blood would think so little of me. Despair because I had raised him, taught him, loved him, and yet somehow he had become this entitled man who thought money grew from the marrow of my bones. That night, staring at those papers, I made myself a silent promise. If he thought he could use me, if he believed I would sign away my future for his ego, then he was about to learn just how wrong he was. And that was only the beginning of my plan. I still remember the exact moment the betrayal fully sank in. It wasn't just a suspicion, it was evidence, black and white. Staring back at me from a thick folder of loan documents my son had carelessly left on the dining table, the pages were filled with glossy projections, numbers scribbled in bold ink, and a business plan so reckless it made my stomach twist. But what made my blood run cold was one simple line: the guarantor. My name. My signature was forged in faint pencil marks, as if he was already rehearsing what it would look like once he put my life on the line. At first, I thought maybe I was misunderstanding. Surely my son would never do something so brazen, so cruel. Without even speaking to me, I turned each page slowly, my fingers trembling, my heart thudding like a drum. But the deeper I read, the more it became undeniable. He was applying for a $600,000 business loan, and he had planned all along for me to be the safety net, the shield against risk, the one left holding the wreckage if his fantasy collapsed. I could almost hear his voice in my head, calm, arrogant, dismissive. "Don't worry, Mom, it'll all work out. You won't lose anything. Trust me." He had used those words before. In smaller situations, a car he couldn't afford, a failed investment that swallowed my savings, promises that never bore fruit. But this wasn't small. This was a dagger, aimed directly at my future. My knees felt weak. I had to sit down. I stared at the documents. The ink blurring as my eyes filled with tears not just of anger, but of deep, aching sorrow. Was this what all my sacrifices had led to? Was this the man I had raised, someone who saw me not as a mother, but as a line of credit? The silence of the house grew unbearable. I pushed the papers aside and walked into the kitchen, pacing back and forth. I could still see the pencil outline of my name, my identity reduced to a shield for his arrogance, the weight of it pressed against my chest like a stone. He hadn't even bothered to ask me. He had decided, without hesitation, that my years of blood and sweat belonged to him to risk. In that moment, my love for him felt tainted. I thought of the times I carried him on my shoulders as a child. The nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the afternoons I skipped meals so he could have seconds at dinner. And yet, despite everything, he saw me only as collateral. My hands clenched into fists. The sting of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to grow, something harder, colder. This wasn't just about money, this was about dignity, respect, and the boundaries a mother should never have to defend against his own blood. And as I sat there, staring at those cursed papers, I knew this would change everything. I still remember the way my heart pounded that night, like a slow, heavy drum in my chest. The folder of loan documents had been sitting on the table for hours, its pages practically screaming at me every time I walked past. My name, my very name, scrawled there as guarantor, without my consent. My hands trembled each time I thought of it, but instead of confronting him right away, I decided to test him. To give him just enough rope to see what he would do with it. So I called him into the kitchen. The house was quiet, the clock ticking faintly on the wall, a sound that felt louder than both of us breathing. He came in with that usual swagger of his, like the whole world owed him an audience. I forced my voice to stay steady, casual even. "Tell me," I asked softly, "about this business you're planning. You've been busy lately, haven't you?" The moment the words left my mouth, I prayed he'd surprise me, that maybe he'd admit to making a mistake, that perhaps he had some shred of honesty left, but instead, his lips curved into a grin that made my stomach knot. "Oh, Ma," he said, puffing out his chest. "It's big, bigger than anything you could imagine. In a few weeks, I'll be running a company, raking in profits, living the life I've always deserved, the life he deserved." As though life had been nothing but cruel to him, while I had worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and sacrificed every comfort so he could study, so he could have choices I never did. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression calm, careful. He went on and on, describing the deal as though it were already sealed, talking about the restaurant chains he would expand, the luxury car he'd drive, the vacations he'd take. He spoke like a man already crowned, blind to the fact that the empire he imagined was built on my back, on my name, on my ruin. "You'll see, Ma," he said, his eyes glittering with arrogance. "It's practically done. All I need is your signature, just one little pen stroke, and we're rich." I nodded slowly, though my hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly I thought the wood might splinter. My silence was heavy, but he didn't notice. He mistook my quiet for approval, for submission. Inside, I was breaking. Each word he spoke was like a knife carving away the son I thought I knew. I had raised a boy with hopes of kindness, hard work, humility, but standing before me was a man drunk on greed, boasting as if his dream was already reality. That night, I realized something chilling. He didn't just want my support. He expected it. He believed it was his right, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son not as the boy I had nurtured, but as a stranger, someone willing to gamble my very life away. That night, after listening to his grand declarations, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the fan above me humming like an old, tired machine. And I thought of every sacrifice I had made for him when he was a boy. I used to walk miles just to bring him lunch during school breaks. When he grew older, I worked extra shifts to pay for his university. Believing that education would give him a life better than mine, I skipped new shoes, skipped medicine, skipped joy just to make sure he could stand on steady ground. And yet, here he was, prepared to bury me alive in debt I hadn't signed for, hadn't agreed to, hadn't even been asked about. The final straw came when I overheard him on the phone the next morning. His voice carried through the thin walls of this old house, careless and loud. "Don't worry about my mom," he chuckled. "She's old. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She won't even know what's happening." My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against the peeling paint of the wall for support. That sentence, those words burned me more deeply than anything he had ever done before. Not because of the scheme itself, but because of the contempt in his voice, the certainty that I was too weak, too naive, too blind to see what he was doing. He didn't see me as a mother anymore. He saw me as a pawn. I felt something shift inside me that morning. A sharp click, like a lock snapping into place. If he thought I was blind, then I would watch more carefully. If he thought I was weak, then I would find my strength. If he thought I would sign away my future, then he would soon learn just how wrong he was. That was the moment I decided. If my son wanted to gamble $600,000 on a reckless dream, I would make sure he wasn't gambling with my life. I would not only protect myself, I would make sure he understood the weight of what he had done, and I would do it in a way he would never see coming. As I sat with a cup of bitter coffee that morning, staring out at the quiet street, my mind drifted back to the years that had built this fragile bond between us. Sometimes, when pain cuts deep, memory rises like a flood, reminding you of everything you gave and everything that was taken for granted. I remembered him as a boy, barely 6 years old, clutching my hand as we crossed the market. His shoes had holes in them, but I promised him new ones once I got paid. He never noticed my own. Shoes were worse. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing clothes for neighbors, my fingers raw, while he slept peacefully in a bed I bought secondhand but patched with my love. When he turned 18, I gave him the small savings I had tucked away for decades. It wasn't much, but it was meant for him to start his future. Use it wisely, I told him, kissing his forehead. He promised me he would. Within months, it was gone, spent on parties, friends, and things that glittered but meant nothing. Still, I forgave him. Still, I told myself he would grow. But now, in my 60s, sitting at a chipped wooden table with loan papers that could ruin my entire life, I realized something painful. My forgiveness had raised his entitlement. Every time I looked the other way, every time I carried his burden, he learned not gratitude, but expectation. It wasn't just that he betrayed me now. It was that he had been building this betrayal all his life, and I had helped him, brick by brick. With my silence, I stared into that coffee until it grew cold. A storm was building inside me. The love of a mother doesn't disappear overnight, but it can harden. Mine was turning into steel. If he thought he could destroy me so easily, he was about to learn just how much fire lived in the heart of an old woman he had underestimated. The day after hearing him speak so carelessly about me, I made my decision. I would not confront him yet. No, that would only warn him, and he would twist his words as he always did, sweet promises, rehearsed apologies, and crocodile tears to soften my heart. I had fallen for them too many times. This time, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. I started small. When he left for the day, I quietly searched his room. I hated myself for it. But what choice did I have? He wasn't a child anymore. Yet, he hid his schemes like one. Inside his desk drawer, beneath stacks of receipts and fast food wrappers, I found more papers. Business proposals with numbers scribbled in his handwriting, sketches of restaurants, bars, logos, each more grandiose than the last. He wasn't planning a future, he was chasing a fantasy. But the real horror came when I found a folder tucked beneath his mattress. It was thick, filled with financial documents, applications, and notes. My eyes went straight to the pages with my name written over and over, sometimes with shaky outlines, as if he had been practicing my signature. My hands trembled as I touched the paper. Bile rising in my throat, I snapped photographs of everything. With my old phone, every page, every forged attempt, every reckless plan, my hands shook so badly the images blurred. But I took them again until they were clear. My heart pounded with every click. When I heard his footsteps at the gate, I quickly shoved everything back where I found it and slipped out of the room. I sat at the table, pretending to peel garlic, my heart hammering like a drum. He walked in smiling, carrying takeout food, as if nothing in the world could touch him. But I stared at him differently now. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a threat to my survival, and I had the evidence to prove it. That night, I sat in my room with the lights off, staring at the faint glow of my phone screen. The house was silent except for the slow tick of the old clock on the wall. And yet inside me everything was loud, my thoughts, my doubts, my anger. I scrolled through the photographs again, each image a dagger to my heart. My son, my own flesh and blood, was preparing to sacrifice me for a business loan he could never repay. His hands. The same hands I had once guided when he learned to write his name were now tracing my signature in secret, a betrayal written in ink. I thought about going to the police. But what would I say? That my son had practiced my signature, that he was planning to forge it on documents I had not yet seen. They would shake their heads, ask for evidence. Tell me to come back when I had something concrete. Photographs of a pen moving across paper were not enough to prove intent. No, I realized they would need more than my word, more than these shaky glimpses. I needed to be smarter, so I began to plan. I took out a notebook, the kind I used to keep for groceries when money was tight. Each page had once been filled with numbers, bargains, lists of things I could and could not afford. Now it would hold something far more dangerous. At the top I wrote, options. Option 1, confront him, demand he stop. Too risky, he would deny everything, perhaps even turn the blame back on me. Confrontation would only drive him deeper into secrecy. Option 2, cut him off completely. Refuse all involvement with his schemes, but even that was dangerous. He already had my name written down. What if he forged it anyway? What if I walked into the bank one day and found myself responsible for debts I never agreed to? Option 3. Outwit him. Beat him at his own game. That last one made me pause. Weeks passed, and the picture of my son's ambitions slowly came into focus. From his scattered notes and the slurred, half-serious conversations he had with friends in the yard, I pieced together what he intended. He wanted to open a flashy tech startup, a revolutionary innovation hub. He called it. The words sounded hollow, expensive, and destined to fail. His excitement was reckless, untethered from reality, and it frightened me. What drew my attention wasn't the innovation itself, it was the location he had in mind. A derelict building downtown, once a thriving office complex, has been left abandoned and empty for years. Every time we passed it, his eyes lingered with a mix of hunger and obsession. He bragged to his friends that it would be his empire, that he would transform it into a buzzing hub of opportunity. And then the idea hit me like a lightning strike. If he wanted the building so badly, why should it belong to him? Perhaps it shouldn't. Perhaps it should belong to me. At first, the thought felt almost cruel. What kind of mother plans to outmaneuver her child? But the memory of the forged documents, the laughter at my age, the reckless audacity of using my name as collateral, reminded me of a truth I had been too polite to admit: some debts can't be repaid with words or forgiveness. Some actions require a response. What he had tried to steal from me, my security, my future, could instead be reclaimed. I began my quiet investigation. Who owned the property? Was it for sale? What was the asking price? I called, I asked questions, I posed as a potential buyer from out of town, and I learned more than I ever thought I could about the intricacies of commercial real estate. The building was available, far cheaper than I expected. The owner was eager to sell, to rid himself of the eyesore before it drained any more value. I visited the site in secret. Dust hung thick in the air, the fluorescent lights flickered weakly. I knew better than to rush. At 63, I had learned that patience could carve deeper, more lasting victories than anger ever could. So I moved quietly, deliberately, like a shadow weaving through the familiar corridors of my own home. While my son slept late, nursing last night's indulgences and dreaming of his empire, I was already awake, brewing strong coffee, poring over papers, and making phone calls that would set my plan into motion. I started with the basics: legal documentation, property titles, bank requirements, permits, and zoning laws. I left no detail unattended. If it were to turn the abandoned building into a thriving innovation hub, every single step had to be precise. There would be no shortcuts, no impulsive leaps. Every action had to count. An old friend, Maritz, who worked in the municipal office, became an invaluable guide. She had watched me navigate hardship after hardship over the decades: widowhood, financial strain, and countless crises brought on by others' recklessness. When I asked about commercial licenses and business permits, she raised an eyebrow, concerned but silent, handing me a folder of pamphlets and whispering, "Be careful. Moves like this, they can change the shape of a family." I smiled, acknowledging her warning, but inside, I felt only resolve. My family was already fractured. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about survival, reclamation, and proving that a lifetime of sacrifices had not gone unnoticed. Evenings became a performance. I cooked dinner, set the table, and smiled while my son prattled on about investors, tech breakthroughs, and lofty profits. Every boast, every grand plan he shared, I catalogued in my mind, noting the cracks beneath his confidence, the inconsistencies that revealed inexperience and overreach. While he chased illusions, I was building reality. I almost laughed at the irony. After he went to bed, the quiet hours belonged to me. I spread out my notes across the dining table, scribbled calculations in the margins, weighed risks, made lists of contacts, potential hires, and local entrepreneurs who could help jumpstart my hub. The building's empty offices, once lifeless and oppressive, transformed in my mind into vibrant spaces for collaboration, mentorship, and small business incubation. It was thrilling, intoxicating, even the taste of agency, of power reclaimed. One night, as I leaned against the window, my reflection staring back at me from the dark glass, I saw the truth. I was not fragile. I was not weak. Wrinkles and grey hair did not define me. They were merely proof of survival, proof of a lifetime spent navigating storms that would have crushed someone less determined. The spark in my eyes, long dormant, burned bright again. I understood then that my strength lay not in confrontation, not in shouting, not in anger. My strength lay in preparation, in knowledge, in the quiet, deliberate accumulation of power, while my son believed the world would bend to his will. I was quietly building mine. And when the time came, the revelation of what I had accomplished would be devastating, not because I sought revenge, but because he would finally understand the cost of underestimating me. I was no longer just a mother. I was a force, a strategist, a woman reclaiming what had been almost stolen. Every quiet move brought me closer to the day I would walk into that abandoned building and claim it, not for show, not for bravado, but as proof that years of resilience and wisdom could outmatch reckless ambition. The next step in my plan wasn't just about acquiring the building or setting up my company, it was about shaping the environment in which my son believed he could succeed. I couldn't let him see what I was doing, but I also couldn't allow him to grow overconfident. If he thought he had the world at his feet, he might act recklessly, leaving more room for me to secure my future. So I began planting seeds of doubt, small but persistent, like invisible roots creeping through the soil of his confidence. At dinner, when he boasted about potential investors or the lucrative contracts he imagined, I asked casual questions. Have you spoken to all the banks yet? Do they typically fund startups of this scale? I kept my tone light, conversational, even curious. He waved me off, laughing nervously, but I noticed the flicker in his eyes, the slightest hesitation, the faint crack in his armor, when his friends came over to drink or discuss strategic plans. I listened from the kitchen, feigning disinterest while carefully observing every word. I made small comments about how strict lenders had become, or how permits often took months longer than anyone expected. The friends laughed and teased me for worrying. But I knew the words lingered. Doubt, once planted, grows quietly in the corners of the mind. Meanwhile, I quietly expanded my own knowledge. Merits gave me insider tips on local business incentives, grants for senior entrepreneurs, and small-scale partnerships that could benefit my company. I learned about tax breaks for innovation hubs, subsidies for community spaces, and the subtle ways city officials encouraged local growth. Each piece of information, every document and pamphlet I collected, became another tool in my arsenal. As the days passed, I watched my son begin to unravel in subtle ways. He drank more, snapped at friends over trivial issues, and grew restless. When I asked a simple, pointed question about his projections, his confidence began to falter. The world he thought would bend to his whims was starting to show its edges. And he had no safety net but me, and I remained deliberately silent. It was a strange feeling, watching the man I had raised squirm under pressures he had never truly understood. And yet, in that struggle, I found a curious satisfaction. Not revenge, exactly, but a sense of justice settling in my chest. While he had gambled with my future, I was quietly securing mine. I continued to build my company in secret. Lists of contacts, suppliers, potential collaborators, and local entrepreneurs cluttered my dining table. Every night, I refined plans, drew layouts for office spaces, and envisioned the company culture I wanted to create, a culture of responsibility, respect, and diligence. Unlike my son's reckless dreams, mine were rooted in reality, and as I watched him stumble, the quiet satisfaction grew. He thought he was in control. He believed his success was inevitable. Meanwhile, I was steadily constructing the foundation of something lasting. And when the moment came, the contrast between his illusions and my reality would be undeniable. The seeds of doubt had taken hold, and I knew, with a quiet certainty, that my patient, deliberate moves were already shaping the future, my future, and the company that would soon stand as proof that wisdom, patience, and resilience always outlasted recklessness. The day I finally walked into the lawyer's office felt surreal. Years of small sacrifices, sleepless nights, and careful planning had led to this moment. The building my son had been so eager to claim, the one he imagined transforming into a flashy corporate playground, was now within my grasp. I had done the research, navigated the bureaucracy, and meticulously prepared for the transfer of ownership. Now, it was real. The lawyer explained each step with measured patience: the paperwork, the payments, the notarizations, and the transfer of title. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhilaration. Every signature I made was a small victory, a reclaiming of what should have been mine all along. Ink on paper had never felt so powerful. After the formalities, I walked straight to the building. It was an old commercial property in the heart of town, long abandoned and worn by years of neglect. Most people would have seen decay and a financial headache. I saw possibility, a blank canvas on which to build something meaningful. Dust clung to the corners, and the paint peeled like sun-bleached bark, but each imperfection whispered opportunity. I touched the cold brick walls, imagining offices where dedicated teams could collaborate, where local entrepreneurs could flourish. Under a structure I had fought to claim, my plan wasn't to indulge in reckless ventures, as my son had dreamed. Mine would be a company rooted in reality, a business that served the community, created jobs, and fostered innovation while remaining financially sustainable. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in renovations. Contractors were hired, schedules arranged, and every corner cleaned and restored. I spent hours detailing interior layouts, designing spaces for small startups, and optimizing the building for efficiency and comfort. Each swing of the hammer, each coat of paint, each repaired floorboard felt like a triumph over the chaos my son had almost brought into my life. He still bragged at the dinner table about his imaginary empire, unaware that I had already secured the building and transformed it step by step. I listened silently, nodding, pretending to share his excitement, all the while documenting plans, budgets, and potential investors in secret. While he chased illusions, I built reality. At night, alone in the empty building, I wandered through the halls and imagined employees arriving in the morning, clients walking in with ideas to implement, and local innovators pitching concepts that could change lives. The energy of possibility filled the space, a stark contrast to the reckless dreams my son had cast in shadows. It was in those quiet hours that I realized something profound. Reclaiming the building wasn't just about revenge or proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my own life. It was about taking control after years of being sidelined, ignored, and underestimated. The building was no longer just a property. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of patience, and the first cornerstone of a company that would leave a lasting impact. By the time the renovations were complete, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in decades. The building, once a source of tension and temptation, had transformed into a foundation of hope, opportunity, and security. My son's dream had become my reality not through luck or inheritance, but through careful planning, discipline, and unwavering determination. And as I locked the office doors that evening, I whispered to myself, "This is mine now, and I will make it last." I never imagined that at 63, I would be drafting detailed business plans at midnight, glasses slipping down my nose, a cold cup of coffee at my side, papers scattered across the table. Yet here I was, fully immersed in creating something I had never dared to pursue before. The building I had claimed was no longer just a shield against my son's reckless ambitions. It was a foundation for a company of my own, a chance to build a legacy on my terms. For decades, I had lived in reaction to bills, to crises, to the whims of others. But now, for the first time, I was acting deliberately, proactively. And every decision was mine. I transformed my kitchen table into a command center. Contracts, vendor lists, financing notes, and floor plans filled every inch. I jotted ideas on scraps of paper, backs of envelopes, even receipts, circling some, crossing out others, dreaming of offices, collaborative spaces, and local entrepreneurs who could benefit from the structure I was creating. I imagined small companies setting up within my building, a startup in a corner office, a crafts collective on the ground floor, shared meeting rooms buzzing with ideas. I pictured the women and men of my community, the baker who wanted to sell wholesale, the seamstress who dreamed of a boutique, The young programmer struggling to find affordable workspace, all thriving within the environment I was building. My vision was simple but powerful, a space where ambition could grow responsibly, where risks were calculated and dreams nurtured. Each night, I worked quietly, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Licensing, permits, financing options, tax incentives, and local regulations became my companions. I spoke with Merritt in whispers about municipal approvals, carefully navigating bureaucracy without revealing too much to my son. Meanwhile, he remained blissfully unaware, consumed by fantasies of a business empire he had never built. The more I worked, the more alive I felt. Scrubbing the floors of the building after a day of planning became a ritual. A grounding act that reminded me of the physicality of creation. I hammered shelves, painted walls, and organized rooms with precision, layering sweat and effort into the foundation of a company that would last longer than fleeting ambition. Each brushstroke, each hammer strike was a declaration. I was here, I mattered, and I could create something lasting. By observing my son from a distance, I realized the irony. While he flaunted imaginary deals and investors over dinner, I quietly gathered every tool, every connection, every ounce of knowledge I had accumulated over a lifetime to build a business grounded in reality. My fear transformed into determination, my anger into strategic action. I was not merely defending myself, I was crafting my future. One evening, standing in the dusty hallway of the building, I caught my reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman staring back was aged, weathered, and lined, yet her eyes burned with purpose. This was no longer about revenge. It was about dignity, resilience, and finally claiming the life I had deferred for so long. This, I whispered to the mirror, is mine, and in that moment, the spark of creation outshone decades of hesitation, despair, and betrayal. The company I envisioned would not only be a triumph over my son's recklessness, but a testament to what a determined woman could build at any age. The morning began like any other, quiet and unremarkable. The world outside still swaddled in the soft light of dawn. I was at my desk, reviewing budgets and schedules, when the front door burst open with a force that made the office fan rattle. My son stormed in, face flushed, eyes wild with panic and anger, clutching a crumpled letter in his hand. They told me the building's already been bought, he shouted, voice trembling on the edge of hysteria. Do you know anything about this? I remained seated, coffee mug in hand, eyes calm, voice even. Perhaps someone was quicker, I said softly, deliberately withholding the truth. I let the silence stretch, watching him unravel. He slammed the desk, rattling papers everywhere. It was supposed to be mine. Do you hear me? Mine. I had plans, mother plans for investors. Contracts, partnerships, for decades, I had instinctively flinched at his anger, stepping in to smooth every conflict, to calm every storm. But not this time. Something deep inside had hardened into clarity. This was not my failure to fix. This was his consequence. I remained silent, my eyes steady on his, letting him face the weight of his own choices. Over the next weeks, I watched from the sidelines as his carefully constructed world crumbled. Calls to potential investors went unanswered, contracts fell through, friends who once filled his evenings with laughter and drunken schemes disappeared, recognizing the fragility of his ambitions. He prowled the house like a restless shadow, desperate for resources and validation, but there was nothing left to give. I had been his safety net for years, but now he discovered he had none. I observed him closely, and with each failed attempt, I felt a complex mix of sorrow and vindication. This collapse wasn't born of malice. It was a natural consequence of his reckless choices, his greed, and his disregard for responsibility. He began to drink more, snapping at anyone who questioned him. The very arrogance that once drove him now morphing into desperation. One evening, I found him slumped in the corner of the office, papers strewn across the floor, head in his hands. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice breaking like fragile glass. "Without this building, without this plan, I'm nothing." I stood in the doorway, heart heavy but resolute, memories of scraped knees, midnight sickness, and small triumphs flickered through me. Every instinct screamed to rush forward, to soothe, to save. But another memory, a forged signature, his laughter. As he plotted my ruin rose stronger, I did not move. I did not speak. I let him sit there, confronting the reality of his actions alone. He was my son, yes, but he was also a man who had chosen deceit and greed over trust and integrity. And for the first time, I realized his collapse was not my failure to prevent it was the consequence he had earned. In the silent hours of that night, as the city outside slept, I felt the quiet satisfaction of survival, of reclaiming control. I had been patient, strategic, and deliberate. The building, the company, and the life I had fought to protect were safe, and now my son, for the first time, was facing the storm of his own making. The first day of officially opening my company dawned grey and damp, a quiet Monday morning that seemed to whisper uncertainty. But inside me, anticipation surged like electricity. I had secured the building, a modest office space that once stood silent and empty, and transformed it into the foundation of something new. The smell of fresh paint and polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of coffee from the small break area I had set up. It wasn't just an office, it was a statement. Decades of sacrifice, vigilance, and resilience had led to this moment. Only a handful of people came that morning. A neighbor curious about what I had been up to, a few local small business owners I had networked with discreetly, and a couple of suppliers I trusted. I greeted each person with careful attention, demonstrating not only professionalism, but also the deep pride of someone who had reclaimed her life. Every handshake, every exchange of ideas, carried a quiet authority that I had never felt in my years of behind-the-scenes sacrifice. The first weeks were slow but steady. Clients trickled in cautiously, many intrigued by the reputation I had quietly built through diligence and discreet work. I watched as my team, small, loyal, and eager, began to absorb the vision I had meticulously drafted in countless late-night hours. Each day was a lesson. I trained them in client relations, taught them to manage resources carefully, and instilled in them the values of integrity and responsibility. The office began to hum with activity, transforming from a quiet, empty space into the pulse of a growing business. I hired young professionals from the neighborhood, many of whom had little experience but plenty of ambition. They reminded me of my own youth, eager to learn and willing to grow. I mentored them personally, showing them how to navigate contracts, manage budgets, and think strategically, emphasizing not just profit but sustainability, ethics, and pride in their work. Together, we built processes, refined operations, and cultivated a culture of loyalty and diligence. The irony of it all was not lost on me. The very building my son had hoped to claim through deceit and reckless ambition had become the birthplace of my empire, and while he squandered his time chasing illusions, I quietly laid the foundation for something real. The company began to attract attention not through flash or spectacle, but through consistency, reliability, and excellence. And in the quiet moments, when the office was empty and the city outside still moved through its daily rhythm, I often paused and reflected. The walls, once neglected and lifeless, now contained purpose and vision. My employees' laughter, the hum of phones, and the sound of collaborative energy were a testament to what diligence and patience could achieve. I had built more than a company. I had reclaimed autonomy, dignity, and hope. My son's shadow no longer loomed over my life. What remained was a thriving business, a loyal team, and the satisfaction of proving to myself that even at 63, I could rise from years of sacrifice and create something enduring. It was inevitable that the distance between my son and me would grow into something darker than disappointment or bitterness that festered quietly before exploding in ways I could sense, but not always prevent. At first, after his dreams of the company unraveled, he avoided me. He drifted into silence, carrying the weight of his failures like a private burden. For a fleeting moment, I thought perhaps absence would heal him, that he might reflect on his actions and recognize the difference between ambition and responsibility. But resentment is a stubborn seed. Left unattended, it roots deeply, twisting into sharp edges that pierce even the strongest bonds. I began noticing subtle signs first: the tension when he spoke, the cold distance in casual greetings, a flicker of accusation in his eyes. He muttered under his breath at family gatherings, his voice low but sharp enough that I could catch fragments, words like, "You took what was mine," or "I should have had it." His statements were never confrontational in public, but in private, they left invisible cuts. I learned to mask my reaction, forcing a smile that belied the sting. I told myself he was young, that time might soften him, that this anger was only temporary. But with each passing week, I felt the poison of bitterness deepen. He replayed his losses in his mind, sharpening the memories of my triumph into weapons of guilt and blame. Each encounter with him became a test of patience and restraint. Then came the day he entered the office, unannounced. I noticed him before he saw me, standing in the doorway, surveying the bustling activity around him. My team moved efficiently, handling clients with care, solving problems I had trained them to address. Papers shuffled, phones rang, emails pinged, all the quiet hum of a thriving company that now stood as a monument to my resilience. He stood frozen, taking it all in, and for a moment, I saw in his eyes the disbelief of a man confronting the consequences of his own recklessness. He didn't speak immediately. He simply observed, letting the weight of the company, the reality of what I had built, press upon him. When the room finally cleared of clients, he approached the counter with a controlled anger, a mixture of shame and rage twisting his features. "You stole my life," he whispered, his voice low but sharp, each word cutting the air like a blade. I didn't flinch. My hands rested on the desk, steady and calm. I met his gaze without fear or apology. "No," I said firmly, "I saved." Mind, his fists curled, his shoulders tensed, and for a heartbeat I feared a confrontation. But I held my ground. Years of compromise, of bending to his whims, had taught me the cost of submission. I would not relinquish the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. The company, the employees who trusted me, the clients who relied on me, they were more than numbers and contracts. They were proof of survival, resilience, and integrity. He left that day still simmering in anger, but I knew something had shifted. His bitterness could no longer touch the foundation I had laid. The company was my empire, my creation, and no amount of resentment could undo what I had earned. And though part of me mourned the son I once raised, I understood now that some lessons, some growth, could only come through the consequences of one's own choices. Life has a way of offering unexpected opportunities when you least anticipate them. For me, that opportunity arrived on an ordinary morning. When a quiet young woman stepped hesitantly into the office, she was seeking employment. Her posture tentative, hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes scanning the busy room with equal parts curiosity and fear. She ordered nothing at first, she simply observed, as though testing the waters before committing herself to the environment she had entered. Her name was Clara. From the very start, she impressed me. She was meticulous, eager to learn, and carried a quiet determination that reminded me of myself at a much younger age, back when I had been building a life from scratch, without guidance or support. She didn't just want a job, she wanted To understand the workings of the company, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than herself, I offered her a trial, allowing her to shadow me through a day's work. She absorbed information like a sponge, taking notes on client interactions, learning the nuances of bookkeeping, and observing the delicate balance required to manage employees and their expectations. She asked questions, not naive ones, but thoughtful inquiries that revealed both intelligence and humility. Over the weeks, Clara became more than just an employee. She became a vital part of the company's rhythm, managing operations with a grace and attentiveness that alleviated burdens I had carried alone for years. She introduced efficiencies I had never considered, suggested new strategies for client outreach, and even recommended initiatives to strengthen employee morale. Slowly, the office began to hum with renewed energy, not because of me alone, but because she had become a part of it. Breathing life into every corner she touched. Clients responded immediately to her presence. They appreciated her attention to detail, her professionalism, and the quiet confidence she exuded. Employees, too, were drawn to her example, working with renewed commitment and a sense of purpose. Clara's influence was subtle but transformative, reminding everyone that competence, loyalty, and integrity were values worth emulating. Her arrival brought with it a personal revelation for me. For years, I had defined my sense of purpose through struggle, survival, and the defense of my own future against betrayal. Now I saw that purpose could expand, taking on new meaning through mentorship and shared growth. Clara represented not only a capable successor, but also a second-chance proof that life could still bring allies and kindred spirits even after betrayal and hardship. One evening, as we stayed late to review the day's tasks, she spoke softly. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said, her voice carrying gratitude and wonder. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Second chances do not always arrive from those we expect. They are often strangers, brave enough to step into a world shaped by someone else's toil, and willing to walk beside them to create something better. Through Clara, I learned that survival and success are meaningful not only when achieved alone, but when they inspire trust, collaboration, and the continuity of purpose. She became a living testament to the company's potential, a reminder that even after the deepest betrayals, life has a way of granting a second chance if we are willing to accept it and nurture it with care. Months passed, and the company had settled into a steady rhythm. Clara had become indispensable, managing operations with precision and energy I could no longer sustain alone. Systems were running smoothly, employees were engaged and motivated, and the client base was expanding steadily. The company, once vulnerable and exposed to my son's recklessness, now had a backbone of resilience I had built piece by piece. Then, one ordinary afternoon, he walked in, my son. The moment he stepped into the office, a noticeable hush fell over the room. Conversations halted mid-sentence, keyboards paused, and eyes flicked toward him. Even the employees who had never met him seemed to sense the tension he carried, a mixture of desperation, regret, and the fading arrogance that had once been his hallmark. He looked thinner, older, worn by months of struggle and poor decisions. His clothes were rumpled, his shoulders slumped, and the confident stride that once demanded attention was replaced by hesitation and uncertainty. When his eyes finally found mine, they wavered, searching for something: approval, forgiveness, or perhaps reassurance, but found only the calm, steady gaze of a woman who had survived and grown stronger in his absence. "Mother," he said, his voice trembling, cracking in a way that reminded me of the boy he once was. "I need to talk." I nodded, motioning for him to follow me to a quiet corner of the office, away from prying eyes, away from the quiet hum of activity. He finally allowed himself to speak. The words tumbled out in a rush, debts accumulated. beyond his ability to repay, friends and investors who had abandoned him, failed ventures, and promises he could no longer keep. Each admission was a testament to recklessness, but also a plea for understanding, a hope that I might still rescue him from the consequences of his own choices. I listened silently, letting the weight of his confession fill the space I felt. A mixture of sorrow and clarity the mother in me wanted to soothe, to rescue, to take on his burdens as I had so many times before. But the woman I had become, the one who had reclaimed her future and built a company that could stand on its own, understood that some lessons must be learned the hard way. "I can't give you money," I said, my voice steady, measured. "I won't be your guarantor. I won't shoulder your debts." He flinched as if struck, the sharp edges of his disappointment cutting through the silence, but I added, softening slightly, "You are welcome to sit, to rest, to observe. You can learn, you can rebuild, but not on my expense." He lowered his gaze, the fight draining from his posture. There was no defiance left, only the silent acknowledgement of his failures. That night, he stayed quietly in the office, working on his own path, learning from the environment I had carefully nurtured. He didn't speak much, but the act of presence, of observing and understanding, became a bridge fragile but tangible between his recklessness and the responsibility he had avoided for so long. For me, his return was not about reconciliation or regaining what had been lost. It was a test of endurance and restraint, a recognition that love does not always mean rescuing, that forgiveness does not always erase consequences, and that growth is only meaningful when it comes from effort and accountability. And in that quiet, charged atmosphere, I realized something profound. The company I had built was no longer just a shield or a legacy. It had become a teacher, a sanctuary, and a testament to the strength of perseverance, proving that survival and growth could coexist with forgiveness, but only when earned, not demanded. By this time, the company had grown beyond a simple business. It had become a hub of opportunity and collaboration, a place where people could learn, grow, and build something meaningful. Employees, once uncertain and hesitant, now thrive. They weren't just workers, they were contributors to a vision I had painstakingly nurtured. We held training sessions, mentorship programs, and workshops to encourage creativity and accountability. What started as a personal quest for stability had evolved into a living legacy. I had always known that age would eventually remind me of my limits. My body ached more than it once had, and long days required more rest, but my mind was sharper than ever, honed by years of struggle and triumph. I wanted to ensure that the company would continue to thrive even if I could no longer lead it. Legacy, I realized, was not about ownership or titles, it was about impact and endurance. Clara became my focus. She had already proven herself to be competent, reliable, and innovative, but I wanted her to understand the deeper layers of stewardship. I began teaching her not only operations, finance, and client relations, but also the subtleties of leadership, how to inspire loyalty, how to guide without domineering, and how to make decisions that honored both ethics and vision. Each session was meticulous, with examples drawn from our own struggles, successes, and failures. I wanted her to see the company as more than a structure of profit and loss. It was a vessel for purpose, community, and trust. Evenings often found us in the office long after the employees had gone, surrounded by spreadsheets, planning notes, and stacks of reports. I shared my experiences, both the triumphs and the mistakes, highlighting the lessons hidden within them. Clara absorbed everything, her eyes bright with curiosity and determination. I saw her growth, not only as a capable manager, but as a custodian of something greater than herself, a company built on resilience, integrity, and vision. One night, as the office lights dimmed and silence settled over the building, I sat at my desk and began writing a letter. Not a legal document, but a testament of intent, a map of succession. I wrote that the company, all that I had built with sweat and patience, should be entrusted to Clara. Not by convenience or obligation, but because she had earned it through loyalty, dedication, and a commitment to the values that had made this company survive when others would have faltered and my son still drifted in and out of the picture. A reminder of what had been lost. At times I glimpsed the boy I had raised, hidden beneath the layers of anger and missteps, but those moments were fleeting. The truth was unchangeable. He had forfeited his place in this legacy long ago, and no amount of regret could rewrite that history. Legacy, I realized, was not about blood or privilege. It was about choices, responsibility, and the courage to act when it mattered most, and in Clara, I saw all of that and more. The company was no longer just a safeguard for my own future. It had become a bridge to the future of everyone who would come after. A story of resilience and empowerment that would outlast me, and a testament to what can be achieved when one refuses to surrender, even in the face of betrayal and loss. It happened on a stormy evening, the kind where rain pounded against the windows and wind howled through the streets, rattling the office doors and shaking the trees outside. I had just finished locking up, reviewing the final numbers of the day, when the front door burst open with a force that made papers flutter from my desk. My son stood there, drenched from the rain, his face contorted with fury and desperation, his eyes blazing with a mixture of entitlement and disbelief. "You gave it to her, didn't you?" he spat, his voice sharp enough to cut through the roar of the storm outside. "I know, everyone knows, you left it all to Clara instead of me." I paused, taking a slow breath, feeling the weight of years press against my shoulders. I set my pen down and looked at him, not with the worry that once would have made me flinch, but with calm resolve. "I gave it to the one who earned it," I said evenly, carefully. My voice carried the authority of someone who had fought for every inch of stability. Someone who had learned the hard lessons of trust and betrayal. He stepped closer, his fists clenched, water dripping from his hair and clothes. "Earned it," he repeated incredulously. "I'm your son, by blood. How could you choose her over me?" His voice cracked with a mix of anger and hurt, the two emotions warring in him as if he couldn't understand a world in which loyalty mattered more than lineage. I rose to meet him, my posture firm. "Because blood alone is meaningless without responsibility," I said, letting each word land with deliberate clarity. "Because loyalty must be proven, trust must be earned, and integrity cannot be ignored. You chose betrayal and greed. She chose perseverance and honor. That is why she will inherit what is rightfully hers, and why you cannot." For a long moment, silence filled the office. The storm outside seemed to pause. As though the world itself was holding its breath, he glared at me, chest heaving, fists trembling, struggling to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman standing before him. His eyes reflected a mix of fury, confusion, and heartbreak, a combination of emotions too complicated to untangle in that instant. Finally, after what felt like hours, he slammed his fists against the desk, making papers scatter and rattling the glass of the office door. "You're my mother. How can you do this to me?" His voice broke into raw emotion, no longer just anger but grief, loss, and disbelief all intertwined. I remained still, steady, unyielding. "Because what is mine to give must go to those who honor it," I replied, my voice firm but calm. "Because choices have consequences, and your actions have already defined the path you walk. You had your chance, and you squandered it. Clara never did." He stared at me for a long while, searching for some crack in my resolve, but there was none. Slowly, with the weight of realization pressing down, he turned and walked back into the storm, leaving the office and my company behind. The door slammed, echoing through the empty halls outside. The wind carried him away, a physical and symbolic departure. In that moment, I understood fully that some paths cannot converge. My choices, my survival, my company, they were mine to protect and nurture, and no amount of blood, regret, or anger could change that. Years later, I sat in the corner office of the company I had built, looking out across the bustling open floor. The space hummed with energy, employees moving between desks, conference rooms filled with discussion, and the soft clatter of keyboards echoing like a heartbeat through the building. I felt a calm satisfaction settle over me, a peace I hadn't imagined I could ever claim after the storm of betrayal, deceit, and family conflict. The company had grown far beyond what I had initially envisioned. What started as a small, cautious venture had become a thriving enterprise, providing opportunities to dozens of people who might never have had them otherwise. Each decision, each late night spent drafting plans, negotiating contracts, or mentoring employees had contributed to this living, breathing organization. It was more than just a business. It was a testament to resilience, vision, and the rewards of integrity. Clara, now my trusted partner, managed the operations with skill and devotion. She had taken my guidance and transformed it into her own leadership style, decisive, fair, and inspired by the same values that had driven me through years of struggle. Together, we had built a company culture rooted in respect, accountability, and empowerment. Young employees were trained with care, encouraged to grow and innovate, and rewarded not just for profit, but for effort and commitment. In Clara, I saw the continuation of my vision not as a shadow of me, but as someone who had earned her place and respect. My son's name rarely crossed my lips anymore, though I often thought of him quietly. He had made his choices, and the world had delivered the consequences he had tried to avoid. Occasionally, I heard whispers from colleagues or friends. He had moved to a distant city, drifting from one unstable opportunity to another. His story had become like a shadow, familiar but unreachable, and though part of my heart still mourned the son I had raised, the woman who had survived, who had fought for herself, understood that his failures were not hers to bear. I lifted a cup of coffee to my lips, savoring the warmth and aroma, a small daily pleasure that now symbolized far more than comfort. It symbolized triumph not over another person, not over betrayal, but over doubt, fear, and the obstacles that life had placed before me. The building, the company, the employees who trusted and respected me, they were the proof that I had not only survived but flourished. Looking out across the office, I felt the years of struggle fade behind me, replaced by a quiet, enduring joy. My victory had never been about revenge, it had been about survival, about self-respect, about reclaiming control over my life and decisions. Even at 63, I had proven that age is not a limit, that persistence and courage can overturn the weight of betrayal and adversity. I leaned back in my chair and allowed a smile to spread across my face, not a triumphant, gloating smile, but a gentle one, born of peace and accomplishment. The storm of the past had passed, leaving behind only strength, resilience, and a company that would continue to grow and thrive long after I was gone. My victory, I whispered softly, was never about anyone else. It was about choosing myself, building my dream, and proving that even in later years, a woman can rise, endure, and create something lasting. Outside, sunlight filtered through the city skyline, illuminating the office and casting a warm glow over the people who made my dream real, and in that light, I felt the fullness of triumph, quiet, steady, and wholly mine. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments to hear the next story. Just click the box on the left